And we are live, baby. All right, so welcome back, everybody. Today we are diving into a very essential skill for any backend developer, and that's going to be working with third-party APIs. What are we trying to accomplish? Well, essentially, by the end of this lesson, you will understand how to enhance your Django application by integrating it with third-party APIs, right? This allows your app to access external services, providing much richer features and data. We're also going to learn about the importance of securely managing sensitive API keys using your .env files, uh, as well as talking about the key for your Django project or even your virtual environment. I know we discussed that stuff about using like the keys or using .ignore. So we'll talk about how that's done. This step is actually very crucial for maintaining your application security, right? It's probably not a good idea to send in your secret key into a virtual version control, right? You don't want everybody else to have your stuff. Um, what else? Well, why are we using third-party APIs? All right. Well, essentially, you should think of your APIs as bridges, right, between your application and external services. For example, if you were trying to apply a weather feature onto your application, uh, it's probably not ideal for you to recreate a weather widget right on your application and then try to, figure out what the weather is yourself and add it to the application. There's actually other APIs out there that can do that for you, right? So using a weather API can help you display weather data. Authenticating users, we'll see that today as well, using OAuth. We're going to, use an API to grab images, which you guys have already done before. So, dynamically grabbing the images for your project. If you wanted to have an automatic email feature on your application, there are APIs that do that. I personally have not used that myself. I know Len, I saw him demonstrate that to his team. So if you guys are curious about how that works, get with Len. There are APIs that can help you with like, live chats and stuff. So third-party APIs can really make your project or help with the business side as well. So let's get into it, guys. All right. So by the end of this lesson, we should be able to make secure and efficient API requests from our Django application, manipulate and process API data, and keep sensitive credentials safe using our environment variables. And now let's explore why working with APIs from the backend is such a crucial practice. All right, from the security standpoint, when you make API requests from the backend, sensitive information like API keys, tokens, or credentials is hidden from the client-side code, right? So this ensures that your secrets are not exposed to malicious people, right? And you'll see that I don't believe that any of the APIs used so far have required authentication. Now the Poke API, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, the Rick and Morty one, right? Have those required keys or anything like that? No, right? So, using your third-party API in your backend will allow you to use APIs that require authentication and then keep your keys, your secret keys safe, or other people don't have access to it. All right. Authorization and authentications, right? So frameworks like Django offer tools for user authentication, and we will elaborate a little bit more on that on Thursday. But by integrating APIs on the backend, you can enforce strict rules about which users can actually access the API data, adding another layer of control, right? And you'll see that once we start adding authentication to our application, there's a way where you can have it set that a user has to be authenticated before they can put in a certain request, like using a certain view of grabbing a certain item, right? And the way that we are going to integrate our third-party API is by creating a view that can grab that GET request, right, and show us what we want. Business logic, right? So the backend allows you to process, validate your data received from third-party APIs before sending it to the front end. So you can combine data from like multiple APIs or apply custom logic to the results. One that it might sound a little foreign right now is talking about the cores and the security policy, but essentially the browsers enforce same ordinary policy or SOP to protect users, which means that client-side requests are often restricted unless the server explicitly allows it, right? So by making API calls from the backend, you essentially bypass many cores-related issues, ensuring smooth integration. We'll speak more about this, I believe. I want to say in the actual full stack day. If you would like a more thorough explanation of cores and security policies, let me know and we can speak about it. The last one will be placing API calls, right? So abstraction. So placing API calls in your backend, it creates reusable services or like modules. So that means if the API logic changes, you can modify it in one place without having to touch your client side at all. So the abstraction portion of doing it in your backend. Now, the actual API we will be using today is going to be called the Noun project. This is what you can find it at. If you just Google the Noun project and click the link, it'll take you here. And essentially, it's just kind of like Pixelbay, if you guys have ever used it, right? You can kind of come to this website and add something like fire, and it can give you an icon of different types of fires, right? Notice here, icons, and we even have photos. So it's just another version of Pixelbay. Pixelbay, I think that's what it's called. Let's go ahead and go back. Icons and photos, right? Um, for you guys to utilize it, you will have to actually create an account, right? What we as developers really want is honestly the API. There's other stuff in here that you can look. Some probably important things will be stuff like the pricing. Notice that there are different versions of prices here. They have free, icons, pro, and creator pro. When working with third-party APIs, I highly recommend to not buy anything. Right, you do not have to pay for anything for during this course. Right, there's so many free resources out there. When it comes to paying for like the ability to use an API, you're essentially the membership you're paying for is how many like um calls you can make is really the biggest thing. Or how much traffic. If you have a high levels of traffic, how many times can your backend, your application use this third-party API before you run out of like your limit, right? And we'll speak more about that in a bit. But essentially, you know, there's different prices. Stick to the free version, guys. There's no reason for you to be buying stuff. Uh, I don't expect any of you guys to buy anything today at all or throughout at any point of the course. All right, but what we are looking for is going to be the API section. And then we come down here and get started, and they'll bring it to this area. You can see here, the last time I did this was when I was working on the school project, or essentially the project for Platoon when I was a student. So there's some stuff that you'll find here. Here's the actual pricing for the API. Okay, that's weird. Anyways, back to API. I don't know why it took me back there. Let's see if it's gonna be weird again. All right, okay, whatever. Well, we cover pricing. For the most part, every API either will be like free versions, some you don't have to pay at all, like the Poke API. But even those that do have pricing, the free version is very generous, right? They want traffic, they want people to use the API. So usually it's a very generous, free option, and you can do a lot with it, and you won't ever really have to buy anything unless you're becoming really big, and this is a big part of your application. Um, we have the documentation here, which we can speak about in a little bit. But whenever you are ready to create your application and start working with the noun project, we are going to click create an application. We will do Yankee and tell us what it does. That's what it do, Yugi. I don't know if you guys know that reference. But we can go ahead and generate a key, right? And we see here the usage, how many times this key is being generated, or this count. We have the limit, a 5,000 call month limit. So that's how many times I can ping this API with my backend, right? Right. And then when it renews. So this is the free version. This is how many calls I get per month. So obviously for a very, very small application, if I had like 1,000 users and they're all using it pretty often, then maybe a free version would not do it. I probably run out within like a day or two. Um, we're gonna scroll down here and we're gonna see here the key management. Uh, this doesn't matter for me because this is for learning purposes. But essentially for you guys, this is gonna be very important, and you should keep your keys secret, right? Both the key and the secret key should both be kept secret. You should not be sharing this with other people. People shouldn't be using your same key. Just common practice. We can also see here that we can regenerate the secret in case you lose it. Some APIs, they'll give it to you once, and then if you don't save it, you can't access it again. So also good practice to kind of write it down. Let me make a note somewhere for this API key. Give me a second. I gotta save it as well. My key and my secret. All right. Now let's actually look at the documentation. Here is essentially your table of contents. We can go to get started, and we have a bunch of different tabs. We have creating an API key, authentication, and making the request. Let's go ahead and scroll down, go through them one by one, and what I am looking for. And here is the first thing I am looking for, which is the sample code of actually getting started with this. We see here it uses two libraries, which is importing requests and also using the OAuth one from request underscore OAuth lib. Looking through the code, we see here that they create a variable called auth for authentication, and it takes in two arguments, which is the API key and the API secret. The second variable is the actual endpoint that we are trying to reach. And then we create a request.get with the endpoint and then our authorization for it. This makes that GET request, saves it to our response, and then we just return the response.content, which will be essentially the data that comes back from that request. There's also a way of doing it in Ruby, and if you want to check C#, so on and so forth, you can. Node.js as well. But this is what we are going to use for our actual view. Let's see if we can find okay, the API Explorer. So if I'm correct, because it's been a while since I visited the site, we add our keys in here, our regular key and our secret key, and we should be able to make some requests here. So for example, I can get an icon, and okay, I see. So these are the different operations and endpoints. Uh, we can create stuff on the post, right? We can make post requests and create things. Add ID to always blacklist. I guess we can blacklist some things. I'm not quite sure. But what I really care about for my application is grabbing an icon, right? So what I'm going to be looking for is specifically this get endpoint that allows me to grab an icon. I can go ahead and open it up, and then it gives me some form of form where I can add certain parameters and I can try it out. Let's just keep it like this for now. I can say try it out, and we see here it gives me the URL, right? That example URL that I will probably have to use. Oh, I already left the area, but essentially within that that endpoint, right? We see this request also has a body, but it's empty because there's no parameters were added in there. And then the headers, right? Well, let's add some query parameters. We can say fire, right? I'm going to look for fire, and then I'm going to limit 3, and then we can try it out. Notice here that the URL changed a little bit. We have v2 icon, and then after icon, there is a question mark. That question mark essentially is the start of a query. And we see here the query is equal to, well, what are we querying? We're looking for fire. And then we added another parameter in here. So we added the ampersand for and then added the new field, which is limit, is equal to 3. And that was able to return to me 3 different response 200. Well, I don't know if I can see here. I can't, right? Yeah, there we go. Here's the response body. It returns this, which is JSON. Notice that it's icons. And then it starts with a list. This is the first list, I believe. That's the first fire. Oh, right here. That was the first item it got me. Yep. Here is the second one. And here is the third. So it did return to me 3. And then at the very end, it has some other key value pairs. But that's essentially how it works. And how I will be doing this. As of right now, let's go ahead and just remove this. And then just add something like fire here. There we go. I'll probably be working with this to see how it works. Let me add it to my notes. All right. So we looked at the noun project. We created a key for it. We got the secret key. We looked at the query parameters, how it works, the URL, what it's supposed to return. Notice the response code of 200. And then we also saw how it's supposed to be set up within your project. Let's go back to that. All right, this is the code that we're going to be using. So I'm going to stay here. And let's actually kind of format this so I can have it. There we go. And now I am in my VS Code. So I made a copy of yesterday's project into today's lecture. So that's what I'm currently working with. I have not started my virtual environment, so I'm going to go ahead and ensure I activate my virtual environment, which I believe I'm working with PokeENV. Bam. Activate. Let me check the dependencies to ensure I have everything I was working with, which I do. Framework, single REST framework. I already have OAuth lib because I was messing with it, but we're still going to go through the steps of working with that, right? Just so you guys are tracking that. But yeah, so I'm ready to create a new application that's going to handle my third-party API. So someone remind me, how do I create a new application on my project?
Make sure you're in the right directory path with manage.py.
I am.
So then you do Python manage.py, start app, and then your app name.
Yeah, thank you, Owen, for that. So we do Python manage.py, start app, API app. Call it whatever you want. Call it third party app. It doesn't that matter.
Can
I
you hear
will
me?
do, yes, I can. We are doing API app. Right. Sorry, API app. I'm sorry, my path is so long. Um, so we see here, let me close this up. I'm currently within backend APIs, which is today's lesson. This is my demo project folder that I've been working on. And we see here, this is my project folder, my other applications. I have some apps here that I will probably delete, which I will do that off screen if you guys want to see how to remove apps from your application, or we can just do it later. We have time. But essentially, here is my application. Are we good to go, or what do I need to do with this app, Ryan?
You need to go in settings.py and make sure it's in the installed apps.
Correct. Thank you for that. We have to go into our settings.py. Now I should probably make sure that it is installed within here. So I can go ahead and let's keep this. I don't like how this is formatted. There we go. We have all the Django and REST framework stuff together. I have my Pokemon app, Move app. Let's add my API app in here with the rest of this stuff. And now it's talking. So let's go ahead and close it up. Close up my requirements.txt. And now let's open up my API app. Well, I'm going to want to create a view for this application. So what's going to happen is I should probably connect my urls.py for my project to my API app. Who can walk me through that process? Demi, could you help me out?
Can you ask the question again?
Yeah. So I have my API app. It is connected to my project. And the way I'm going to handle this Python code here to make a request to the third-party API is going to be through a view, right? So essentially what I want to do is create some form of endpoint on my application that I can use to put in the request within a view. So if I want to create an endpoint and make this view, how would I go about connecting my API app and doing this? This is kind of like building off from what we talked about yesterday.
Got you. Can you go to the API.app
Yeah.
and then views? Oh, I got you. We haven't even started it.
Yeah.
Let me. I would have to pull up my notes. Give me 1 second.
Sure, no problem. If you like, you can also phone a friend.
Anybody want to jump in? Alrighty. Don't phone me out.
All right. Well,
Gear.
You want
I
to
see
set up
James.
the API view?
Go ahead, Jesus. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off if I did.
Oh no, I didn't raise my hand. I just butted in. No, you want to set up the API view with your GET request with the API from the noun project within your views.py.
Sure, we can tackle that first. Right, we could have either done the URL pass to connect those, or we can just go ahead and make the view right now and then just connect them afterwards. Whichever step you guys decide to do is fine. But let's take it the route that GC just brought up. Let's go ahead and set up our API view. And there's a couple things that I have to import for my API view. And if I am completely honest with you, I don't know every single one of them from the top of my head, but I can kind of just remember some of them. And I know that I will probably need something from REST framework.views, which is going to be my API view. I know that for sure because our view needs to inherit from that.
And
I
then
know,
you need the response as well.
correct. I
for
do
the
need my
post.
response.
Yeah.
So from REST framework.response, I believe it's where it's from. import response, right? So for sure, I need the API view. I do need the response. That's just what's going to allow me to create that that skeleton of at least creating the class and being able to send something back. And I think that's all we need as of now, and we'll talk about the rest of it. Right. So we have the view and the response. So let's go ahead and create that class. We can say class, and I'm going to call this noun project. And just like I mentioned before, we have to inherit from the API view. And we are going to create what type of request here, guys?
A get request.
Correct, a GET request, right? But we're not creating anything here. We kind of went through this documentation. We're making some kind of GET request to grab an image from the noun project. So we do GET. It's going to take itself and request. Now, within here, we are essentially going to use the Python code that they gave us. And there's two things that we have to take care of that we do not have, which is importing requests and importing request OAuth lib. So down here within my terminal, I'm going to say pip install request. Let me just make sure this is the correct one, which I believe it is.
Yep, that's correct.
Yep. Pip install request. Sorry, so I try to do this for as much as I can from the top of my head, but sometimes I have to look at it. So we see here that requirements are already satisfied because I've already installed it. And the next one is going to be pip install request plural underscore OAuth lib. Once again, like I mentioned before, the requirement is already satisfied because I've already done that. But now that we've installed these two different modules, what should we probably do, guys?
Update our
freeze.
requirements.
Pip
Oh, or
freeze,
freeze,
update
yeah.
requirements. You're both correct, right? We want to update our requirements.txt, do pip freeze. And I harp on that because it's very easy to mess these up if you just forget and then you don't know what your program is relying on. So we say pip freeze, and we want to freeze into requirements.txt. Right? That looks good. A no response is a good response, I always say. So we can move forward. And now that we have our request and our OAuth lib, we are going to return back to our .view, and we are going to say import requests, and then we will also say from request underscore OAuth lib import OAuth 1. Now, complete transparency with you guys, I'm not too expert in OAuth 1 or OAuth lib, so let's actually kind of come down here and do a quick Google search, right? Essentially, I do know it is some type of scheme for authentication, but we can come to OAuth 1, and this is not what I was looking for. I don't think it's the correct one. Or was it? What is OAuth 1? OAuth 1 enables your client application to access data provided by a third-party API. Essentially, it handles the authentication for you. I don't remember the exact definition of it and how it does it, but we require OAuth 1 to actually do the authentication for it. Just know it's an authentication scheme. Right, so OAuth, Open Authorization, is a protocol used for access delegation where resource owners grant third-party applications to access their resources without sharing their user credentials, right? I'm not a subject matter expert at OAuth. I've only used it a handful of times, to be honest with you guys, but that is what we are using today for the actual authorization, and that's what is required from the noun project. There we go. So we have our imports working, import requests. We are importing OAuth1, and we are going to do as the noun project asks of us. So we will say auth, right? We are going to use that OAuth that we have imported to actually work with the authentication with our keys. And if I'm correct, I think the auth one, and I think Len might be a little bit more subject matter expert on this, helps working with like hashing of your keys, or in some way protecting them. Can you confirm that, Len? If he's in here. If not, we can go ahead and move forward. But I'm gonna go ahead and grab those keys that I have saved, which I never closed up anyways. So we can grab this. And this is gonna be for my key. And as we saw over here, we also need our secret key as the second argument. So we grab that. And we can add it in here. So we have the auth variable. Next, we are going to grab our, we're going to create our endpoints. And we already saw what we were kind of reaching for. Oh no, I left it. Oh no, I took a copy of it. And we are attempting to connect to this endpoint right here, which is the noun project v2, right? We're trying to grab an icon and we're querying specifically the fire one, right? The fire. Let's go ahead and return back to our code. And we see here that the next step is actually making the request. So we say response is equal to request.get. We pass in our endpoint for the first argument. Our second argument is how we will authenticate ourselves. And we send it the variable we declared using OAuth1. Finally, we print our response.contents. What should we probably also do at the end of this GET request? Which I'm sure someone can actually answer it. Yes, Jacob.
Oh, I just had a question, a real quick question. Can you clarify again between what the difference is between using just the key and the secret? What's the purpose of like having both of them? Because as far as I was understood, like the key itself was usually like a secret for your like yourself, but I just needed some clarification on the difference between the two.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think if we both have the key, we can probably make the request. Like we can both make the request. But I think if you don't have the secret and I do, you can't actually get authenticated. I would have to look it up if I'm being completely honest with you. I don't remember the exact difference. Key versus secret and APIs. But I think that's the difference, right? So a key is a unique identifier used to authenticate an application or user trying to access an API, while a secret is a confidential piece of information often considered like a password. So that requires more stricter level, right? And here we can see the differences here. Primarily used for identifying and tracking usage. Can be sometimes shared publicly for read-only access, right? But to actually get authenticated, this is what you need. This is like a password, right? I think it's a little close to what I said. I'm not quite sure of how like what you're limited to if you only have one or the other. If that makes sense.
Yeah, Demi said in the chat, so it's a kind of like two-factor authentication, sort of.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it.
Okay,
Yeah,
that makes sense. All
great analogy.
right, thank you.
Yeah, sorry if I couldn't be any more helpful. But let's go ahead and back to the question I had asked, guys. What did we forget here in our get method? So we have the code that was requested from us by the noun project, but what do we need to do here? Yes, Owen?
Return your response.
Yeah, we're gonna have to return our response. It's not gonna like it if we don't return anything. We'll get it. We'll actually get an error. As of right now, let's just go ahead and return true so we don't get anything, and we can print out our response content. We have our view. Is this gonna work? How do I actually use this? If I wanted to open up, let's say Thunder Client, right? Or actually, we don't need the noun project, so let me expand this. And then let's move this to the side. So I have this, but how do I actually use it in the noun project? Or if I wanted to put in the request. What's the next step, guys?
You won't be able to use it until you set up like a URL.
Yeah, I need to set up my URL path. So what is the first step in doing that, Demi? Can you kind of start, at least start us off?
Start as run server. Yep. Probably got you. I mean, you can go to URLs or actually make a URLs.py maybe.
Yeah, I mean, we do need to make a URLs.py for our API app. That is a good start. URLs.py. And now how do we actually get this, right? What happens when I put in a request? Let's actually open this up right here, right? I run my server, right? I'm opening it up, and notice here that it's trying to grab a URL, but I don't have this URL 1270 whatever yada yada at / does not exist, right? And it comes down here and it says using the URL conf define and your project.urls, Django tried these URL patterns in this order, right? So it went into our project folder, it grabbed the urls.py, it went into our URL patterns that we have created there. It checked admin, that does not match the current URL. It checked squares, does not match. Checked circles, did not match. All right, and it went down the line of everything within our URL patterns until it matched something for 127, and it says the empty path didn't match any of these, right? And then when we do admin, we don't get the error anymore because when it ran that, it found the admin and it made that match, right? If we try to do /API v1 Pokemon and said something like, or let's not say Pokemon, we said like noun, it's not gonna find it, right? Because we don't have a URL pattern for the noun project or the noun view that we have created. So let's start from there. How do we fix this issue?
Make the path.
Yeah, we're gonna make the path. Where do I make that path one?
I think it was in the project folders, urls.py,
Yeah,
under URL patterns.
absolutely. We saw that was the root, right? It checked the root of our project and it started here, right? The project.urls. And then from there, it tried to grab something else. So we go there, we scroll down to the path, and these are the paths as demonstrated through the server that it tried finding, but it couldn't find it now. So we can go ahead and add a new path to actually handle that. And this will be API /v1, and we'll call it now. Well, as we know, paths take 2 arguments, right? It takes the URL pattern, and then the second one is the actual function, or in our situation, our view, right? So I don't want to add the view here. We talked about separating the concerns of our URL patterns. And just like we did for Pokemon app and the Move app, we told it to include the URLs from the other applications, essentially rerouting it somewhere else to handle all that stuff strictly within the app. So let's go ahead and do that. We can go ahead and do include, and we'll pass in our API app.urls. We created already, so it does have a urls.py. And then what's the next step? Someone that's not Demi or Juan or Owen. Yes, Gary.
In the appy underscore app dot URL, we're gonna make the pattern.
Yeah, we're gonna make our patterns. I've never heard anyone call an API appy. Don't ever do that again.
Yes, sir.
All right. Yeah, we're gonna go ahead and create our URL patterns, right? So we have to import path. So we're gonna say from Django, I believe it's .urls import path. And then we are gonna declare a variable called URL patterns. And this actually does matter, guys. URL patterns matters. I put URL pattern without an S, and it absolutely lost it. So actually putting URL patterns exactly how it is does make a difference. We make our URL patterns, we add a list, and then we are going to create our path. Well, as of right now, I just want to make one path strictly just to noun, and it makes one simple query, right? So I'm not going to add any suffix to the API v1 noun URL path. It should just be noun / that's it, makes one request, gives me what I'm looking for. And then in here, I'm going to add the view I created, which is noun project. So I need to import it in here. So I'm going to say from .views imports noun project. And now we can use that view here and say noun project dot add view, open and close parentheses. And then finally, we'll give it a name for the testing purposes, and we'll call it noun project. And now this URL pattern should be good to go. Let's go ahead and run my server again. And we can come back to our Django server, refresh this. And we are getting something here, guys. We see that it made the GET request. HTTP 200, okay, that means we got a status of 200, and we're able to return a response. And then we come down here, and just like our views noun project was created and how we added print response content, it does as such. Now, this is not pretty, right? Obviously, it's not pretty, but it's printing something out, and that's good, right? This is very good. So let's go ahead and actually do some change to our noun project. So we have our response.content. We are returning response.true. And the next thing we're going to do is actually fix what we are returning. So let's refactor. How about we do, I believe, okay. I think we can do response.json. Yes, we can. All right. So the next thing we're gonna do is actually mess with this response here. So we are going to do a new variable. We call this response JSON. And we're going to take the response that we initially get, and we are going to call the JSON method to turn this into a Python dictionary that we can manipulate. And instead of printing this out, we can change this to response JSON. Let's run that again and see what it shows us in our console here. And it's still a lot, not pretty, but it's at least formatted. We see here the start of the dictionary. Let's return that instead of returning true. I can move my server over here. And here it's something that I can understand. We get the type 200. We get the dictionary that we can look at. And it says icons. It's bringing me back a bunch of them, right? Why is there so many? This is why I was getting such a huge response. Yes, Owen?
We didn't filter out any of it with like a, not a serializer, but a, what's it called? Sorry, it's early, but we didn't provide any methods in our noun project to clarify what data do we want to appear.
You're on the right track, but it's how we're querying the noun project and how their .get works. If you just add, just like we did, I want fire, it's gonna give me all fire, right? There is a method that we did, which was using another query parameter, which is limits, and we can set that to 1, right? That's how their API works. And if we do that, it should change what we get back. And as I mentioned, yep, we only get 1 fire icon back, right? It was how the noun project was working. Sure, we won't filter anything either ourselves, but there's a much easier way of doing that and just use whatever the third-party API created to our advantage, right? They already have a method of doing it. There is no reason for me to try to query through here and just grab certain data back. There's no reason. I can just use the third party's methods, right? So we have that. So far, so good. Let me make sure I am on track on the curriculum. So we created our view for the noun project. But now next is going to be to actually tackle the elephant in the room. And that is the very fact that I currently have my key and my secret within my my project, right? And this isn't really ideal because when I get ready to deploy this, or we got put it on version control, it's gonna be out there. And I don't know if you know about this, but there's people who create web scraping stuff for GitHub, and in the event you maybe accidentally load up your secret key or your API keys, even for a minute or 2 minutes, you risk the fact that someone has access to it already, right? They purposely scrape GitHub looking for certain keywords like key, right? Secrets, and then they pull that. So in the off chance you've done that or you do that, just know that more than likely you should probably just get a new key, right? And then we'll talk about how to remove this. And what we are going to do is we are going to create a new file called .env, right? And this .env is going to allow us to store everything away in a location. And we will talk about how we are going to grab the items. So let me go ahead and stop my terminal. Let me clear all this mumbo jumbo. And what I'm going to do is within the same directory, right, the same level as my manage.py, at the root of my project, I am going to make a new file called .env, which should create a file that looks like this, .env. And then at the same time, I'm going to create a .getignore, which I do not have yet. And the getignore is something that you guys should be somewhat familiar with already. It's something that GitHub uses, that whenever you essentially make a push into a remote repository, I'm sorry, not remote, a repository on GitHub, it's going to see that getignore. And for one, it's going to ignore that file. It won't take in the getignore, but everything that the getignore has within its contents, it's not gonna pick it up, right? So if I have a file that has all my secret keys, which we will, that get ignore will take in that file name. So Git knows what to ignore when uploading my stuff into GitHub. And you would do something very similar for your virtual environment if you have your virtual environment at the same level as your project, right? Which some of you have, right? So if you're wondering why you uploaded like all these freaking files into your GitHub and you're like, where's this coming from? It's probably because you loaded up your virtual environment too. So let's actually talk about how that's going to work. Well, within this .dnb, what's going to have to happen is I'm going to create two new variables. These variables are going to be noun API key and then noun API secret. And these variables are going to hold the key and the secret for my noun API within it. You do not need quotation marks. And then the naming convention for your variables typically is all capitalized, right? We have another one, which is going to be the Django secret key. And we can see that in a little bit. I'll just leave it as an empty string. But now we have the key in here and we have the secret key in here. Well, how is my project going to know how to actually grab this stuff? You know, if I don't have it directly in my code. Well, what you need to do is install a certain library, which is called python.env. Right, spell out the dot. You can install python.env. And we see here that requirement was already satisfied. And essentially what this library is going to do is grab the variables from here and use it where I need to use it. Well, how is that going to do that, Roger? Well, we're going to navigate to our settings.py directory. And then at the very top where we have from path flip import path, we're going to import our .env values. We're going to say from .env import .env values. And what this is going to do is allow us to grab these values from our .env file. And then somewhere here, you can just do it right afterwards. What you need to do is create a variable called env. And you need to let it know what file it has to use. So you call the .env method that you just imported. And then within this method, you give it the name of the file, .env. Right, this method allows it to track what file it's supposed to use for env. Right, so this variable knows, hey, I'm referencing that .env file. Make sense, guys? Do I have any questions so far of how this is working? Yes, Jacob?
I'm just a little confused as far as like you added stuff to your urls.py under the Pokédex project and the API app. I'm just wondering why you were utilizing both of those if you're just working with the noun API. Does that make sense?
I'm sorry, could you explain your question a little bit better? Also, my headset's turned off. What do you mean? Like, are you talking about my applications?
Yeah, I was wondering why you were when you were working with the urls.py, you were doing stuff in the urls.py underneath the Pokédex project and the API app. I was just wondering, I don't remember if you added anything to the urls.py underneath the yeah, that one, the first one. The I was just wondering why you were utilizing both of those URL files from the API app and the Pokédex project.
The API app. Yeah, so are you referring to the urls.py from the overall project and the URLs.py from API app. Why do I have two different ones?
Yeah, I was a little confused by that.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to everything else as well. We did the same thing with Pokemon, and we did the exact same thing for moves. But the reason for it goes back to the concept of separation of concerns, right? As of right now, I can kind of delete these because I'm not really using these. Let me just comment it out. My app has 4 URL paths, right? We have admin, Pokemon moves, we just create now. Pokemon app has 2 other paths into it. So we can see Pokemon app. We see it has 2 URL paths that it takes. What else do we have? We have the move app, which is right here. This should have 2 other ones. We are creating 2 for the now. For your user is going to have multiple of them. Your user will have like sign up, login, info, logout. You might have one that creates super users. You have all these other paths that are being made. And what we do here is essentially just, instead of doing them all within just the Pokemon project, we have the ability to isolate them to their individual apps, right? That way, the only thing that Pokemon app should worry about is everything Pokemon related, right?
Right.
Pokemon app should have its own URLs, its validators, serializers, fixtures. And going back to why we have project and why we start an app, the project is our refrigerator. Every app was the ice cream flavors, its own container, and we keep everything isolated to just separate the concerns. Going back to the same concept of using React, right? Why we created components and pages. It's for structure and maintenance and just everything in general, right? This is just kind of like a principle of how we create our program. Does that make sense to you, Jacob?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Let's go ahead and close out this API app. Okay. So I'm in my settings.py. I imported the .env values from .env, which allowed me to create a reference to my file and assign it to this variable. And notice here, we also have the secret key within here. And we kind of use this as an example to see how this will work. I'm going to go ahead and grab this secret key, guys. I'm going to copy this. And I'm also going to add it within my env file. And let's just fix this. I don't like how it looks. Okay. All right. So I now have this as well. Oh my God. Did I always have this? I don't know if it's going to be an issue. I don't know if my program's about to break.
Yeah, I was wondering the same thing, if that parenthesis belonged in there or not.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Hey, I'm going to stop here real quick. Even though it's not exactly an actual stopping point, my alarm is going off, which is telling me that means, oh, I'm sorry. I moved the cameras. That means it's time for a break. So let me go ahead and pause the. We're still looking at my VS Code, correct? Awesome. So before we went on break, we saw me trying to put my secret key into my env. This parentheses was given an issue. I'm gonna go ahead and take a pause on the Django secret key. Let's work on the rest, and then we can come back afterwards and handle the secret key. So, in regards to using the
I think Juan has a question, Roger.
oh, my apologies. Yes, Juan.
Juan.
You're good. I put in the chat before we left. Basically that secret key that we have for the Django project or whatever that you were trying to put over there. Should we not upload our project to GitHub before creating the .env folder, like at the very beginning of our projects? Or does that not matter for the Django?
That is correct. You do not want. You should probably create a .gitignore file and a .env file pretty early on. I would add this step of the .env to your settings steps when you first create a project, just so you don't forget. So you guys have some notes of how to set up a project. I highly recommend do that there. And just, do not add that secret key into GitHub. Chances of someone grabbing your stuff are pretty low. I don't think anyone's like specifically looking out for you guys or anything like that. Nothing against you guys, right? But I don't think so. But still, good practice. Hide your secret key away. You don't want anyone messing with your project or your work. Yes, Gary.
From what I recall, if you accidentally push your secret key up to GitHub, I think they'll actually notify the website. The website will disable that key. You'll have to get a new one, and you'll get an email just saying that that GitHub found your secret key, pushed to like a public repository or something like that, and that you'll just have to get a new one.
They never told me any of this.
I
Because I've done it. I'm telling you, I've done it.
I've done it.
I've yet to get a notification, but in the event you need to create a new secret key, you can go ahead and run Python manage.py show plus, and you can import from the django.core.management.utils. You import this method, and you can create a variable called new key. Do get random secret key, and you print it out, and it gives you a new key. So in the event you messed up or you lost your secret key, it's not the end of the world. You can regenerate one, and then just copy and paste that bad boy into your settings.py. So you're seeing this live, now you know how to do it. Good to go? Awesome. So, all right, let's actually use this .env file, right? It doesn't no use to create one if we can't even access the variables within it. So we are going to navigate to our views.py. And in here, we are going to remove these keys. And what we are going to add here is going to be use the variable that we created called env. But I obviously don't have it in here, so I need to import it. So I'm going to say from Pokédex project dot settings imports env, and now I can use it here. I'm gonna say env dot get, and then the variable I declare within the env file. I can't type today to save my life. Finally, we do the same thing on the other end, and we say env dot get noun API secret. All right. And let's make sure that works. So let me go ahead and exit out of my shell. I'm going to run my server. And then in here, I can go ahead and refresh this page. And I don't see anything breaking. It's good to go, guys. Do I have any questions in regards to the noun project and grabbing our API key and secret from the EMU? Yes, Owen.
Can you go back to the syntax for the auth variable in your noun project class? Yeah, right there. That line 12. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Let's go ahead and remove this print response for now. All right. So we have that taken care of. And I want to return back to the curriculum because I believe that was the first part of today's lesson. Let me just double check. Yeah, that was the first part. Now, before we move on to part 2 of today's lecture, let's go ahead and return to the settings.py. This is my secret key. Let's go ahead and copy it. I'm gonna keep it in quotes for this one, because this parentheses might give me some issues. And then back to my settings.py, I remove this. And then I'm gonna say env.get Django secret key. I think that's what I called it. Django secret key, correct. Let's go ahead and run this again. And if it works and my stuff's not broken, then I'm good. And nothing's broken, so it's good to go. I no longer have my secret key directly in my code. The next step is to come to my git ignore, and all I'm going to do in here is just add .env. So I do not have my stuff, or this should not be it. Do I have any questions on how this works? Yes, Owen.
Can you run through how to get a secret key again
Sure.
for your Django project? Thank you.
You open up Shell Plus, and then you use this command. You have to import something from django.core.management.utils import get random secret key, create a variable, new key, and then call the method that you imported. Remember to add the parentheses, and then you can print it out, and it gives you a randomly generated key.
Sweet, thank you.
No problem. All right. I think someone had a question. Was it Juan?
I did, but I figured it out. Thank you.
So do this only generate the key and not the secret?
This is the secret key. Yes, look, get random secret key. This is for Django specifically.
Oh, okay,
Alright.
my bad.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, Django specifically. Disclaimer, right? This coming from Django.core, and it is allowing you to grab a new secret key in the event you are like me and you forget about it. Cool. All right. If I have no further questions, we can go ahead and move forward with the next part of class.
Do you care to elaborate on, in the curriculum, it tells us to add our virtual environment and this psych cache into the git ignore as well.
Let me see.
If
I
our
see.
virtual environment is
Yes.
in the project directory.
So, that's if you don't want to add all that stuff in there. You can go to PyCache and you see all these, changes and updates that you made to your code, right? Some people don't like having that stuff. The PyCache I'm referring to, the .env is a lot of stuff. I probably would not have it up there. All right, so for unnecessary stuff like PyCache and your virtual environment, if you have it on the same directory, then you would just add it in here into the git ignore. Right, the same way that we added .env in here into git ignore, you would do the exact same thing, where you would add whatever you decide to call your virtual environment. Mine is pokey-env, right? And then I would add the PyCache, right? There is nothing really much to elaborate on that besides the fact that you just don't want it on your GitHub. Make sense?
Yes, thank you.
So let's go ahead and move forward. That was the backend API and secrets. Next is going to be formatting and displaying our responses, right? So we saw within our reviews, it did not look pretty, right? Whenever I did print response JSON, let me go ahead and exit out of the shell, run the server, and if I just do it here, I see I get my info, but notice that it looks pretty ugly here, right? And maybe that's not what we want. Well, Python has this cool thing that we can import, and it's called pretty print. I'm sure you guys have probably seen it or probably heard that word before. There's some extensions here that you guys probably installed early on in the program called pretty print, or something like that we can use. And we're going to use that today in here. So we're going to say from, actually not even from, we're just going to say import pprint. All right. I believe it's a built-in Python library that comes with Python when you installed it, which is why we can access it. Right. Import pprint, right, which stands for pprint. The next step is going to be to come down to our view and create a variable. This variable is going to be called pp is equal to, we're going to call the library we imported, which is pretty print. It's going to use a method called pretty printer, which essentially allows you to set up your actual printing of your variables, right? Or your values. And you can see that here when we add the arguments, like indent is equal to 2 and depth is equal to 2. Right? After that, we can say down here, instead of just doing our regular printing, where we just print it response.json, we can replace this and say pp.print or pprint, and we pass in a response JSON. Right, this formats how it gets printed out. We can go back here, make that request again. Status 200 OK, and notice how this time my data is formatted in a nice manner. It's not ugly and all jumbled up. It's a little bit more readable than what it was before. Do I have any questions about pprint and how that works? Yes, Owen.
This is essentially just to give the developer a tool to easily visualize that data, so then they can easily just parse through it, I guess.
That is exactly what it's doing. Yes. All right. Especially when you saw me make the first request, that large amount of data that was just weirdly formatted, I could not read at all. I had no idea what was what. At least this gives you a top level of what these keys are. I know that I have icons at least, right? And I think we can probably, let's change this up a little bit. See how that formatting is working. It's not going to indent any further. Let's go depth of 3. Make the request. Notice how it goes even deeper into the data, whereas before, because depth of 2, it only went down 2 levels. Here we said it, hey, I want you to go 3 levels down, and it goes even further. Right? Let's go ahead and change it to depth of 4. Rerun this, and it goes even further. So it allows me to view this through my my console, and it's not like unreadable. It's not nastily formatted. Nastily formatted, or I don't even know if that's a word. English is hard. Right? But we have this, and we can now visualize this. Pretty cool. Right on. Okay. All right. So we have, let's go ahead and reformat our views. All right. Our views as of right now, how is this working? Is this giving us anything that we really like? Can we grab the URL and go ahead and print this out? Let's go look at our data. As of right now, it's giving us a bunch of jumble stuff. We are returning a large amount of data that I do not need. I want to be able to grab a single icon. And as of right now, I'm not grabbing a single icon. I want to come into thumbnail URL. Right, so I know I probably have to go into icons, which returns a list. It has a value of a list. And then within this list, it has an object. Oh, correction. Yeah, no, I am right. It's a list and it has an object in it. Right? It has one object and this object has key value pairs. And I'm looking for thumbnail URL. That looks like the only URL within here. So let's go ahead and fix that. I want to grab response.json and then I'm going to say icons. And then at index 0. And I believe the final key is thumbnail URL. Thumbnail URL. Let's send this again. And I'm now grabbing this nice little image. Let's see how it's looking like on my server itself. And click this. And we get the fire image. All right, so that's working. It's formatted. It's good to go. We are displaying the URL. Well, how would I actually? Yes, Owen, your hands raised.
Yeah. Would you be able to use dot notation at all in Python for these objects? Like you use just brackets every single time. Would you be able to do dot icon since that is a key in the response JSON object?
I can use .get. We can see that here.
Okay.
.get. I don't think the dot notation is gonna work. Thumbnail URL. No.
Well, if you go back to your response, the response print, the icons is a key, like parentheses are in your quotes. Like, would you wouldn't be able to do response underscore JSON dot icons since it is a key in that object?
Yeah, it's not gonna work.
Okay, thank you. That was my question.
It's okay. Yeah, we get a file internal server error. It's gonna want that bracket notation, or you can also just use the .get. But yeah, it won't work. Thank you for that question, though. Good question. Good questions. All right, we're gonna go ahead and move forward. So we have our now project. This is grabbing back what we want. But the way that I'm gonna use this is I want to be able to grab an icon for a Pokemon's type, right? We're talking. The scenario is I'm creating my front end, right? I'm managing my clients. I'm trying to create a card where I can present my Pokemon, and whatnot. Whenever I query, whenever I grab a Pokemon, I can grab its information, right? But I also want to be able to create some kind of other function or method that can also grab an image to display whatever type of Pokemon it is, right? So how do I know? How would I fix that? Well, for one, I have to probably add the type to the Pokemon field, which I do not have. I'm not tracking that. And then I have to find a way to ensure I get that back with my request. So we're gonna go ahead and do that. We're going to move our way down to the Pokemon app. Let's close everything else that we aren't using. Within this Pokemon app, I'm going to open up the models. And in here, I'm going to add a new field. This field is going to be called types. It's going to be models.char field. Oh. The default type for my Pokemon will be a normal type, which I think goes with the show and the game. And then it should have a validator, which I will have to create for it, right? So as of right now, it does not have a validator, so I'm gonna want to create a validator for that, which I can go into my validators.py. And in here, the validator I'm going to create is going to be validate Pokemon type. Right? It will take in a value. Now, essentially, this validate Pokemon type should be able to take in the type of the Pokemon. It should check it against a certain list of Pokemon types that we might have established, and then return it if it's valid, right? So within this method, we should create a variable called allow types. And then we will add a couple like rock. Normal's already in here, but we should probably still check it. So they don't get error when they add it manually. Bug, ghost, fire, water. We have Pikachu, I think, so we should probably say electricity as well. Electricity. Or electric, I think. Electric. And then last one we'll say psychic. All right, so we should probably make our this right here. I don't know if there's any other ones, maybe like dragon type. I think ground. No, rock is what it's called, right? I don't know. Well, you guys get the picture here, right? We create allow types. And then we say if the value, and then we're gonna lower it because everything within our allowed types is low, and I don't want to get some weird input, is not in allowed types, then I should probably raise a validation error. Raise validation error, and it's gonna say invalid type, pass in the value, and then let them know, please enter or choose from. And then we'll pass in a list of allowed types. All right, so we say please choose from, and then we grab the list of allowed types, join them together with a comma to make it into a string, showing them what they can choose from in the response. Right? Once the validator is created, we can return back to our models.py. And in here, I would add the validator. So from .validators import validate Pokemon type, and then just add it within the validators. Do I have any questions about creating a types field for my Pokemon or creating the validator for this field?
Can you go back to the validators just so I can look at it real quick?
Yeah, here is my validator size. Validate Pokemon type. It takes in some form of value, which is going to be whatever they try to add into that field. We created a custom made allow types list, which should have types that we can check against. And then we say if whatever is passed in is a value, we format it to dot lower so we can compare it to what's in here. We say if it's not in allowed types, then I want to raise the validation error, right? And that's all it should really do.
Yeah, cool, thank you.
We should, I believe we would have to do else return value. It should be good like this. Yeah, there you go. So either way, how you do it, if you do one way or the other, that's how you want to do it, right? But do I have any questions?
I'm assuming you're allowed to make the same with a dictionary. You just chose the list for now.
Yeah, you can do a dictionary. All right. If I have no other questions, let's go ahead and actually migrate this. So we have that. I need to make the changes to my server. So manage.py, make migrations, because we made an update to the field. Then we say Python manage.py migrate. Right. And we now have that working. I got no errors, so I can feel pretty confident that it's within there. We could go back in there. Actually, let's do that. Actually, no, let's not do that. I want to see what's happening. Let's make a request. Well, we changed the Pokemon. So if I get all Pokemon, there should be something here. Well, as of right now, it has name, level, moves. The Pokemon that have moves have it, but they don't have moves. Notice that they return an empty field. That's not really what I'm looking for because I just added a new field that I should probably be tracking, right? If I'm trying to grab with for my client, right, my front end, I'm trying to create maybe Pokemon cards, and I get a Pokemon. I should also know what type of Pokemon it is. Oh, let's see an individual Pokemon. Let's say ID of 3. Why are you yelling at me? What? Do I not have it set up? Whoa, what is going on? Okay, it worked with Squirtle. It did not like my ID. Okay, we can probably fix that in a bit. That is wild. Okay, but if I get individual Pokemon to make an individual card, I should be able to get the type, right? Because that's part of what I'm trying to do in my application. So what do I need to fix, guys?
You need to make migrations and migrate your changes in your model.
My changes are fine. I made the migrations. They are, we saw that here, right? We said Python make migrations and migrate, right? Migrate, make migrations. The changes were made. Why is it not showing it to me whenever I put in a GET request to my views?
You got to reconfigure your serializer.
I have to reconfigure my serializers, right? If we go to Pokemon app, check out the views. How does it send that data back to me? Well, when I grab all the Pokemon, or even when I grab a single Pokemon, I'm grabbing the objects. Here we have a query set of Pokemon objects. We pass the entire query set into Pokemon Serializer, and this is what formats the data that I'm getting back, right? Same thing with a single Pokemon, right? We grab a single Pokemon by the ID or by the name, and we serialize. Well, let's look at the serializer. The serializer is only going to return what we tell it to return. And as of right now, I only have ID, name, level, and moves. So what do I need to do in here to return also my type? It's not your question. What was that one?
You need to add it to your fields.
Yeah, very simple. Just add it to my fields. Correct. We can look at the models. It's types, plural. So I return back to my serializer, and all I do is types. My server, I believe, is still running because it's still pinging me here. Let's go ahead and send this again. And now I get types. And by default, it is normal type. So now me, as I'm creating my clients, right, as I'm doing my front end, I know that my intent was to create maybe like a Pokemon card, or a Pokemon deck type of application. I can now be able to query a Pokemon using a GET request. I grab that Pokemon. I can grab the types field from the data that I'm getting back, and then use that to make another GET request using my noun endpoint to grab a specific icon for fire or rock, right? Which I believe we have that within the noun project, but we have that working now. But as it stands, the noun project is only returning to me an image of fire every single time I make that. So what do I need to do to my API app.views method for grabbing an icon from the noun project? What needs to be updated here? If I want to be able to grab an image for the individual type of a Pokemon, what should I probably do to my GET request for the noun project? Once again, not a trick question. How is my GET method for the noun project structured to do what it's doing now that I need to change to make it more dynamic, right? So I can grab a specific picture.
Make some kind of comparison in accordance with your keys, I'm assuming, or with your list. So like if it's fire, then grab this specific fire one?
Not exactly. Not what I was looking for.
Would
You
you
have to change
pass?
the end. Sorry, go
No,
for it.
no, go ahead, Ryan.
Ryan, I think you're on it. Go ahead.
I was gonna guess if you change the endpoint based off like the type, so it knows like what which one to pull.
Yeah, exactly. As of right now, my endpoints, it's an empty endpoint. It's just noun / and it does not have the ability to take any arguments, right? My views does not have any kind of, you know, IDs equal to this or like, this or that, where it takes some kind of data from the request URL path or from the request body. It's doing none of that. It's just strictly once it reaches that endpoint, hey, I'm good. I'm about to run this, and that's it. That's all it's doing, right? So we should probably add something in here. I hear a hot mic from Jacob,
Oh,
but
sorry.
it's okay. Just don't do it again. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, so we can go ahead and we can fix this. So within our noun path, we can come down here and we can add string and then pass in types, right? And now we can actually add something to this variable here, and let's add a / or it's essentially an argument that we can also use within our views. So within here, we want to grab types, right? And this types will be used as a parameter that we can add to our endpoint to figure out what we are looking for, right? Essentially, all we have to do is add a F here to format our string. And then we're going to change what we are querying. We can add the value of whatever types is. And we're only going to grab one. So now when I come here, let's go ahead and check this out. Now I'm going to say fire. We get back a fire image. Actually, let's do this on my browser. We can say fire. We can click this and it shows me fire, which is awesome. Let's go ahead and come back. We say water. For my water type Pokemons, I get water, and then let's see what electricity gives me, or electric. There's a picture for electric, and this is my symbol for my Pokemon card, right? And now I have it set up, so in my front end, my client, when I'm setting up my application, when I'm trying to grab an image for the Pokemon in my Pokemon card, I will just put in a request to my backend looking for a specific type, right? I will use the endpoint for API / v1 / now and pass in the type that I'm looking for. And then my backend will handle all that of talking to that third-party API. Essentially, I never touch the API. Right? Does that make sense to everybody? Do I have any questions? Yes, Jacob?
Yeah, I just had a question, like just to clarify, when we refer to third-party APIs, like does that mean like what you just said? Like we have like one API we're using directly, and then there's like one that we never really touch. Is that what that is referring to? Like, I'm just wondering what the term third-party API is kind of like referencing to, I guess.
Yeah, thanks for asking that. Well, it's essentially a third-party API is anything that isn't our backend, right? That's what we refer to. Our backend is like our database. It's our API for us to work on our own stuff. A third-party API will be something that we didn't create ourselves, that we are pinging the same way that we are using the noun project. Right?
Gotcha.
That would be a third-party API. Whether you're pinging it from your backend or your front end, it's still a third-party API. If it's not a part of your specific application, third party.
Okay, cool. Thank
Makes
you.
sense? Owen, I saw your hand up next.
Yeah, could you go back to your views.py and look at the response variable?
Views.py.
No, the noun project. Yeah, that one, I guess. So your endpoint that is actually, it's going, that puts out the actual endpoint for that API. And then that's essentially hiding your API endpoint from your browser, or like not your browser, but like so the user doesn't see that API string, or not API string, but the actual the
Response.
route that it's taken to get that image.
Yeah, I mean, you're the one creating your client, right? You know you don't need all the extra stuff. So all you do is just format it in your backend. So whenever you are ready to use this view method in your front end, all you have to do is use the endpoint, right? Pass in a parameter in the URL, and you can grab back an image, right? That's all you're doing here. You never have to use your front end to do any of this. You don't have to do an actual request for the endpoint. Your front end isn't handling keys, right? This is all being handled in the back end. Right, if you were doing this from your front end, then in your React project, you would create a function that's like get image, right? You would do an axios.get request. You would have to add your API key for the noun project in there. You would have to add your secret key in there, and you don't want to do that, not on your front end, right? You probably want to handle that in your back end, where we can do stuff like this and hide our, our stuff and so on and so forth, and then just let the backend take care of all this mess, right? So we do that here in the back, and then we format it in a way so when you actually want to use this third-party API in your front end, all you need is the customized URL that you created, which is API v1 noun, and then give it what you're looking for, right? This is all your front end will have to do to grab an image from the noun project. Why? Because your backend is doing all the heavy lifting of using your key, right? Creating an endpoint, grabbing the response, formatting it. It's doing all the heavy lifting, leaving your front end to just put in one simple Axios request, and that's it. Cool? Make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
No problem. Juan, your hand was next.
Yeah, just a general rule of thumb, I guess you could say. How many is too many third-party APIs, especially depending on how big the scale of the web application would be? Like, where do you want to more or less be cognizant of how you're overloading your own API instead of just making your own stuff? Does that make sense?
I don't think there's like a max. I will say that what you have to worry about for your project is you need at least one. Your personal project will have some kind of grading rubric, and one of the requirements is that you require a third-party API, if I remember correctly. So you will need that. But I don't think there's a specific limit. If you can use 2, 3 to manage what you're looking for, then you can, right? You might want to have, there's different APIs for different things. So I wouldn't say that you're limited to any or max to any. You can use an API to handle your email messages. You have a different API to handle transactions, PayPal, right? There's other APIs that do that too, but I believe PayPal is one of them that can handle your transactions. That's a third-party API, right? You will need that for your website. So I don't think there's a specific limit. It's whatever you need, right? There's no reason for you to recreate a transaction application, on top of your application. So you will use your some type of third-party API to do that. You will use a different API to send the receipt once they make a purchase, right? These are all things that can come together, but you're not limited to anything specifically. Just use it as you need, right? Do I have any other questions? Okay. If I have no other questions, we can go ahead and move forward. So we have our noun project. It's dynamic. It's grabbing what I'm looking for. And it's good to go. Let me get back to this. These are some slides that we were supposed to go over, which I didn't because I get logged in, so I do apologize. So here I am back here. So why third-party APIs, right? Well, as you just saw, there is no reason for me to recreate the noun project, right? If there is already some kind of application out there that has millions of images that can do certain queries for me, why would I recreate that myself, right? When I can stick to the dry method of don't repeat yourself, right? Just do what you got to do. Use the Now project or whatever third-party API you want that you've encountered instead of reinventing the wheel. If it's already out there, it's there for you. Might as well utilize it, right? And that's where the APIs can really come in handy. I created a music discovery app using the Spotify API, right? The Spotify API has millions of songs in their API, millions, right? What my application was doing, it allowed people to create accounts and then create a playlist that will ask you a couple questions and then generate a playlist depending on the input you give it, right? It could be random input about like how much wording is in their song, how many beats per minute, how much instruments there is. There's like different ratings that you wouldn't believe that Spotify tracks on each of their songs, right? So I did this and used Spotify to query these results to create a playlist for my users. And then on top of that, they were able to actually listen to the music through my application, right? It was essentially create their own playlist and then they can use it as a form of a music service, right? I will say, granted, they have to authenticate through Spotify too, so that means they needed a Spotify account to use it. But what I'm trying to get at is I didn't have access to millions of songs, right? I leveraged the fact that Spotify already has your API, right? They have it for other people, developers. There is no reason for me to go there and try to find millions of songs to add onto my database when I can just connect a third-party API and let my API, the third-party API, talk. Depending what the user is asking for, it would query the Spotify API, grab the music, and then it would save it to their profile, their library, their playlist. I would only keep track of whatever songs that they got from Spotify, right? So I knew what should be on their account. And then I would save those songs to my database if they were already encountered. So yeah, that's how I did it, and that's why third-party APIs can be very helpful for your application. Third-party API request flow. So you saw this flow a little bit when talking about our endpoints, but let's actually look at it when talking about third-party APIs. We have our client here, which is like your front end, right? And you put in some kind of request. Let me go ahead and see if I can draw. Right, and your front end, you have something like get or access.get, and then you give it a URL path, right? Oh Lord, I'm sorry, I'm so new to this. All right, access.get, give it a URL path, and then I'll just add that there. I'm not going to elaborate on this part, but that will allow you to make a request to your server. And this request is going to ask you for something like, hey, the URL path was something like API/v1, the noun, and I'm looking for a fire image, right? Your front end, your client asks that from you, right? It puts in this request to your web server. Well, luckily, our views, we figured out how to handle this. Whenever we get this endpoint, what does that do? Like, what does that do? It runs our view method that we created, right? Our view method being the noun project. And what that does, it never touches my database, right? Why? Well, because I don't actually have this data, right? I'm using and leveraging a third-party API to make that request. So that sends the request to the web server at my third-party API. This is the noun project, right? My API view here handles that request. We already saw that. We built that where we create, we imported auth1, we create the endpoint, and then we put in a request to our noun project. So that request goes from our web server to the noun project server. They get our information. I don't know how they have their backend set up, but they use our requests, our authentication with our key and our secret. They grab the information, comes back to the web server, comes back to us, and then we give it back to our front end. Right? At no point do we ever touch our database. We didn't have to recreate any data. We didn't have to have the data ourselves. We utilize a third-party API and grab that and provide it to our client. Are there any questions on the third-party API request flow?
Yeah, in terms of efficiency, for example, instead of running it every single time to get the fire type, would it be smart to set, like, can we set up things almost like constants, like for the fire type constant or whatever, and dynamically give it the URL to have it so that you can just access it directly after getting that one request, if that makes sense?
Are you talking about your client?
Yeah, for example, like I know I have fire types, so I'm gonna have the same image for all of them. Instead of sending one single request for every single Pokemon entry that's a fire type, would it be smarter, or are there cases where I can just do like, okay, I'll send one single request, I'll get it, and I'll store it in a fire type variable, and then I'll use that for the rest of my application? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, most definitely. You definitely can. I mean, then you can also delete any kind of information after they log out. So if it improves that session, you could. It's however you want to handle it in the front end. But yeah, it would make it faster, especially if you have multiple queries.
I think one, you would have to have plenty of memory, depending on how much you want to store, because what you're referring to is like caching, so you can send it to your user quicker. But of course, it's going to require more resources.
Yeah, so I was wondering if it would just be smarter to kind of hold one for smaller things, or if it'd be better to just cache it every single time and go ahead and just ping the API every single time.
Yeah, good answers, guys. I like the conversation and how you guys are honestly thinking. This is the thought process of a developer. But yeah, you would have to weigh your options, right? Of how big that data type is and how often you're going to be using it, and how to go about it. All right, let's go ahead and move forward. Why third-party APIs? So we already discussed that, right? We see here also the flow of how it works, creating that view. This is the request that we imported, the image. I think it's OAuth as well. But we essentially already covered all this thoroughly. I just wanted to ensure that we saw these slides and talk about them as needed. So, time is 11. We are going to go ahead and go on our 10-minute break. I will see you guys here at 11:10, and then we will talk about our last part after our break. Let me go ahead and